Welcome, everyone. We are back with St. Augustine's Confessions, talking about Book 5 today. We've got Winfred and Olivia with us, and of course, anyone who's tuning in online. Welcome, guys. Good to have you back. Yeah, hopefully you
Hi.
can hear me. No, that's good. All right, so I wanted to give a quick outline before we dive straight in, so what people can expect from Book 5. So St. Augustine has moved to Carthage, which is the big city in Northern Africa, the second most important city in the Western Empire, the Western Roman Empire. And he's starting to see the falsities and the gaps in some of the philosophies like Manichaeism and the other heresies that he was initially buying into. He's also dealt with the loss of a close friend and experiencing God's comfort and contemplating on his mortality as well. And in Book 5 in particular, he gets more into, well, he encounters St. Ambrose, of course, and he slowly starts to understand that he's got to really surrender to God's will and to essentially understand that God has been there through his whole life. And this is something that he's been contemplating throughout all the first few chapters, is that how great is our God, essentially. His mercy, his vengeance, his love, his delight. So it's a really interesting reflection into perhaps how God feels. Cool. So before we jump into Book 5, I wanted to just give you the brief context around St. Augustine and the geopolitical context for Carthage versus Rome as well. As I said, Carthage was the second biggest and most important city in the Western Empire after Rome. And this is in Northern Africa, a center of intellectualism, culture, entertainment. But there also comes with that all the activity of lust ambition, intellectual righteousness, all the downside. And eventually the hustle and bustle of the city leads to significant restlessness, I think, in St. Augustine's life. So he enters Carthage when it's on the brink of crisis or eventual downfall. He was writing this around 400 AD, and we know that 410 Rome falls to the Visigoths, and we know 430 or 429 Carthage is sacked essentially by Vandals from Spain. And yeah, so it's towards the end of that era, and he's already a bishop of Hippo at the time of kind of writing this, right? So he's reflecting, and he has, I guess, the benefit of 20, 30 years of hindsight and reflection as well. So that's the context behind, the geopolitical context behind Confessions. And just so we're talking about Carthage, we're talking about all these different places, but it's hard for us to understand what does that really mean and what's the significance of that. So yeah, we'll dive in. So Book 5, I don't know if we have any initial comments, Olivia?
Yeah. So something that initially struck me is in chapter 7, he is talking about, he's going into, like you described, he's really starting to realize like some of these religious ideas that I have might be wrong. He's starting to question himself. And that all stems from what's the gentleman's name? Bauschus?
Yeah.
Bausch. Yeah. He really is. You glamorize people in your head. He's really excited to meet this guy. This guy's a pro. He's a bishop. And he's going to answer all my questions. He's going to really understand how to explain these intellectual thoughts to me. So I thought it was really interesting that he had hyped up this person to have all the answers, and then he meets him and he's disappointed. So that was an
Yeah.
interesting moment, and I think that kind of caused him to turn to God more and rediscover his faith in a different way.
Yeah, I think Manichaeisms, the Manichees or the Manes focus mostly on science and to some extent good and evil. I don't know if you either much about Manichaeism as a philosophy or anything like that, but I think ChatGPT will give us a hand. So I think it's
Well,
essentially, that, yeah, go on.
no, I was just gonna say, you look that up. I noticed that he already, like you said, he was already a bishop, so he had already realized that a lot of things didn't fill him as much as God did. Like in chapter 4, he was already mentioning that the things, knowledge of the earth, of terrestrial things and celestial things, didn't give him happiness but the knowledge of God did. So he's already
Mm.
strong in his faith when he met this person. And he was already thinking that he may be wrong in some things, but he was already strong in his faith when he met him.
Yeah, he seemed like someone who was always like inclined towards God. You know what I mean? Some people go through that phase where they're like, I don't believe in God, and that's an issue in itself. But I agree that St. Augustine seems like he always has had that like desire for more and that seeking for more.
Oh, definitely. I think we've all gone through that when we come of age. We're trying to figure out the world, trying to understand the world. And there's so much to understand in terms of the physical world. But then there's so much that science can't explain as well. So I think that's part of where this Manichaeism comes in, where they combine a little bit of spiritual and physical sciences. So the main belief with Manichaeism is that they're talking about there's a force of good and there's a force of evil, which is aligned so far with Christianity. That makes sense. But in their sense, that the force of evil is equal to the force of good. It's dualism in that sense, where it's balanced. Obviously for us, we know God's got it. He is sovereign and he is the King of Kings. They do think about the physical world as, even our bodies and humans, as flesh, the flesh being evil, whereas in Christianity, we're made in the image of God. We know that we are made good and we sin, and that itself tarnishes us. But the body itself is not sinful or evil. It's what we're doing with it. So that's one thing. And then the other two things that Manichaeism, that I guess Augustine was trying to combat, was Jesus is found to be a divine messenger, but he's not God. He's not true God, true man. And as well as when we die, the Manis, who essentially Mani was a Persian prophet, and he combined a whole bunch of different philosophies into this and eventually came up with this Manichaeism. But like you said, Olivia, it doesn't quite cover all the bases. So Augustine really had this problem had struggled to, and I think a lot of us struggle with this idea of evil. Why does evil exist? And Manichaeism does provide that dual good and bad philosophy to explain it in that sense. There is a intellectual prestige with the scientific endeavors as well. And then there's a moral excuse to justify your sins because my body's bad. It's my nature. It's not my fault. And again, we see that in modern day as well. This is how I'm made, or this is whatever, like I just have to go along with it. And no, that's not the case. You have a will and you can choose to do certain things. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's also beautiful to acknowledge that like we inherently have our fallen human nature as well. And we do have original sin until we're baptized. So I feel like to counter, not that you're arguing for it, but to counter them, like we still acknowledge that people have a tendency towards evil, but we just acknowledge that we can become a member of God's church and we can combat that. It's not a sickness that God can take all that away. So I think that's a beautiful thing about our church. I didn't know a lot about infant baptism until I really started getting interested in it. And it's really beautiful that we baptize infants and we help them become a member of God's church and start their life off in like a pure and just closer to God. Hi, Trevor.
Hi,
Aiden in. Welcome.
I'm using the phone, which is a bit, so I'll switch to my laptop, I think. Just one thing.
No dramas.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just going through, we just covered the essential differences between Manichaeism and Christianity, which St. Augustine is wrestling with, as well as the geopolitical context of Carthage, which is starting to get really nerdy here, but the geopolitical context of 4th century Carthage and 4th century Rome. But geez, I might have to get a doctorate or something soon. But yeah, so that's what we covered, and we're just diving in now. Give me one sec. All right, so we know that Carthage is in a bit of turmoil. It's on the edge of collapse. There's a lot of restlessness in the city itself, and that's interesting. If you were to take, from a narrative perspective, if the city and the location itself was a character, it's Christian at heart, but it's restless. It's being attacked from all directions. It's under siege. Its morals are under siege. It's tempted to drift from its core message, from the core cross. And I guess it's physically away from Rome. It's on another continent in Africa. So there's another interesting commentary that just, by the grace of God, was put in my head. I don't know if you ever thought about that, but the location itself. And we're all separated from Rome physically. We're all in different continents, and we all have these kind of heresies to combat in our regions as well. So there's a really interesting parallel with St. Augustine's journey and what we're seeing as our journey as well now, that Christians have been persecuted and still are persecuted for quite some time. But this kind of 21st century has just been a little hectic.
And I think moving too shows him, like, when we're spiritually discontent, you try different things and you try to move to a new city because you're like, that's going to fill my heart. That's going to fill this spiritual discontent. And I feel like that's what he's chasing. He goes to a new city and he's going to find the answers that I need. People are going to be able to explain this to me. There's going to be new brilliant minds here. But then he gets there and he's, oh, I don't think anyone's going to be able to explain this to me. Like, this is not going to fill me spiritually. And I think that was God's intention, right? To kind of wear him out so he realizes, no, you need to turn to me instead of turning to these other things.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's something that we all get enamored by, the various people online who are great orators, and there's so many like little groups that we could all easily fall into, and followers of various personalities online, or online bishops or whatever, if you want to call them that. But yeah, it's really key that we take time to discern ourselves what's really of value. Yeah. Winfred, I don't know if you have any commentary, but some of the key themes, I know you're like me, you're a bit behind in the reading. What we're seeing is one of the major themes, and it's like a theological and political battle in this region, is that there's a Donatist presence where they are like a rigorous separatist Christian sect. They rejected communion with the clergy and had compromised during persecution as well. So Augustine is wrestling with these various Christian denominations, if you will, as well, in his even 300, 400 AD, when Christianity is legal, still battling with, maybe our version is Protestantism or Anglican or whatever.
And it sounds like how it happens to us, like when we go to, and I think you guys were just mentioning, you go to different areas and culturally places are different, and you find yourself with different types of beliefs and things like that. And it sounds like that's what happened to him. Maybe he felt that he was going to find his answers there. And he just realized that it wasn't right. And just like you mentioned, we also see it in the social networks too. It's very easy to fall for other types of following the wrong people, the wrong crowd. And a lot of times you got to stop dead in your tracks and say, okay, Christ, what am I doing here? Let me go back to you and look at yourself, the inside. There's a lot, even in the Catholic culture, there's a lot of different groups. You got the TLMs, you got the progressive people, you got all kinds of people. And a lot of times they're infighting. And if you're not careful, you end up getting away from what Jesus wanted. You even get away from Christ by just following people. You have to start thinking about what is it that Jesus really wants. And you have to distance yourself from everybody and get back to him. And that's probably what he was trying to do when he was out there searching.
Exactly. You're so right about the internal kind of various divisions or different camps in the Catholic Church. Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. One thing I've got here in front of me is some commentary from various theologians on this particular chapter. So give me a sec here. All right. So you might recall this gentleman, Joseph Ratzinger, talking about St. Augustine's journey. So Pope Benedict XVI says, he describes Augustine's journey as a model for the modern man. We're essentially desiring truth, but trapped in ideologies until he encounters the real holiness and beauty in the church, which is like literally what we were saying, except much more eloquent, pretty much spot on. And he also calls out Ambrose here. He says, Ambrose represents the church's maternal wisdom in leading the prodigal son home. So that's, I think it's a great perspective for us as well. Are we acting as the church to those who have been fallen away from the church? How are we doing that? How are we bringing people back into the flock? And I really appreciate that. One other thing, St. Thomas Aquinas, of course, a famous Dominican and probably the most intellectual theologian we have in the Catholic Church, and probably Western philosophy, he's saying that he agrees with Augustine's insight that reason alone is insufficient without grace. I think we fall into this trap of, yes, the intellectual part of Catholicism is there and it's valuable and it's come from God, so it is complicated and it is resilient and robust. But we also can't understand any of it without grace. And we can't really turn it into reality without grace either.
Yes. And I think, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you go.
A big thing for me too is like, I've had to humble myself and be like, okay, I don't need to know this. The average individual does not need to know this. So if I'm getting myself into something that could potentially become a mess, you have to like really ask God, is this something I really need to look into? Because sometimes like through misunderstanding of certain things, you can pull yourself into other temptations. Or you could just pull yourself into, like we talked about earlier, pull yourself into the intellectual world, and that pulls you away from your prayer life. So it's really, I think that a lot of people pursue this like intellectual path with Catholicism, and I think that's beautiful. And I think that you should, but I feel like everybody should also know their limits or like when to stop with what you have going on in life, because it's not always my time and my place to do this sort of research. I'm not a theologian.
Yeah, I always find that difficult to balance. I'm in the process of becoming a lay Dominican, and it's the heavy hitters of theologians are all Dominicans, and that's very, very core to the kind of ethos. So it's good to understand and be able to explain even the highest of paradoxes and things like that and concepts. But I always feel like we still need to be very practical and still need to live the gospel in a very practical sense as well. So we need the clarity, but we need to iron it out. But then once we iron it out, we still need to maintain the kind of practical, real world application of it. And you're right, like 90% of it is not going to be the high level, high intellectual kind of stuff. Or even 95% of it. It's about love, forgiveness, humility. Like those things are so much bigger. You don't need to be a theologian. You don't need to do all that. I'm sure like the most humble person would be much holier than the most intellectual person. But anyway.
It's also the culture, isn't it? There's room for everyone, and not everyone is called to live holiness exactly the same way. Not everyone is given the exact same mission. Otherwise, there would be an awful lot that's lacking in the church as well. So each person, like each individual, have the Christian mission. And for some people, that will look more heavily hands-on, practical, charitable works. Some people, it would be evangelizing and non-Christians. So some people, it would be focusing on those on. For each individual, they're going to feel like their mission is the most important focus, because it's the most important focus for them. But what I've had to learn just through experience as well is therefore that's what everyone else needs to focus on as well. Everyone else needs to focus on whatever they need to focus on. You need to focus on whatever you need to focus on. And together, by God's grace, we'll fight.
That's really powerful.
So, yeah.
Well said.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's quite profound because, sometimes we feel I've got this great passion for something and you want to share that with people, but not everyone appreciates it or understands it or They might be doing other stuff as well. Yeah.
But I also think
it-
we're collaborative. Oh, you can go first, Winfred.
No, I was just going to say that goes in line with what the Bible says, that the church is like a body, has different parts. You got arms, you got legs, and everybody has a different job. In the church, you got the priests, you got the musicians, you got the deacons. Everybody has a different job, because if everybody was being a priest, then you wouldn't have that. Everybody has a task. And with that little task, the whole job gets done and it gets complete. So everybody's job is important. Nobody's job is more important than the other ones. That's why everybody thinks that their job is the most important one, because everybody's job is important.
I love that. And that's so true.
That's-
And I think, yeah. Do you want to go?
Yeah, it's not mutually exclusive that my job is important, so is yours. Yeah, it doesn't diminish my work if your work is going ahead or something like that.
That really is difficult, though, to not look at what other people are working on and be like, oh, that seems cooler. That's something that I really struggle with, is just with life in general, like not getting off path because you see that someone else is focusing on something else.
Yeah, it's difficult because you've got you. I said this, I can't remember who I was talking to. 80% of life is just like boring, repetitive stuff that we don't want to do. We just have to do it. And the beauty of Catholicism, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, is that it shows you the value in the mundane, because raising a family in my context is really hard. I've got 2 toddlers who run around, drain us of everything, push us to the extremes of our emotional limits, and it's really difficult. It's complicated. You're destroyed by the end of each day, and then that kind of compounds. But when you take moments to reflect on, okay, what am I doing here? I'm raising children. These children are not mine. They are God's children, and they belong to Him first and then to me. So I'm actually in charge of them, and I've been given a job to look after them. So that actually is it. The perspective of, oh, these guys are a burden, or, oh my God, this is so much work, I need to run away or whatever. We hear that all the time, and that's a lot of people, like, they just don't stick around and can't get through it because it is hard, but that's what you're meant to be doing. That's your goal. Then you need to work and do everything else around that to support that. But it helps you orient yourself, I guess, is what I'm saying. And it gives you a payoff that
I was just telling
you
a friend
know
of
that
mine that
this is what you're made for. Yeah, you go.
No, I was just telling a friend that sometimes God gives you a task that you think is too big for you, just because God wants you to learn how to trust Him. And He's giving you an opportunity to let Him show you His might and His power. He do things for you. And He knows that task that He's given you, that you're going to be able to do it. Just like what's happening with the 54-day novena. We didn't think we were going to be up for the task. And it's going lovely. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's wonderful, man. It's great to see that so much fruit is coming from us connecting and just supporting each other. And we're all in different parts of the world, so most of us have never met. But yeah, one day we'll figure it out. We'll meet in Ohio or something.
The heroism, I guess, of the mundane is sanctified. Father Mike Schmitz did one of those little Ascension Presents videos on the Noonday Devil, or like the capital sin of sloth. And like Thomas Aquinas, I think, translated it, and sloth in modern English would mean laziness, but it fundamentally is a distraction away from your daily duties and what you're actually called to do. And often the distraction is by temptations to do other things that are not necessarily bad. It's tempting you away from what you're doing with temptations of other good things. So how the whole Noonday Devil thing started was hermits living out in the sticks. Early morning, they would do their farming or their whatever it is. And then during the hottest part of the day, in midday or noonday, they would then bunker down in the hermitage and pray. But while they're praying, they would feel all sorts of temptations that, like, why should they're wasting time just being holed up at home when really they could be preaching in the market square and they could be converting people, or they could be going out and doing charitable works and things like that. And they're being tempted to do all these other things, which will pull them away from what God really wanted them to do, which was to stay at home and pray for those few hours. Yeah. Each individual will be tempted more or less by any of the deadly sins. Some will be bitten more by anger, some will be bitten more by lust, etc., etc. So not everyone will experience temptation the same way, but every single human being, without exception, is going to get bitten by the dinosaur.
That's me, man. That's definitely me. I'm so distractible. I'm so restless. I'm so bad at that. It's something that
That's all of
I
us,
just
bro.
need to focus on.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I didn't have anything.
Okay. That's super helpful to hear, because it's one of those things where like that sort of sin turns into, you start feeling bad about yourself. You're like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I sitting here thinking in this way? Why am I acting like this? It just becomes like this shameful sort of thing. So you telling me that and like that's a tool to know that exists, because every single day, without a doubt, like that's really hard. And it does make you send those thoughts into your head too. You're like, am I doing the right thing with my life? Is this what God wants me to do? So thank you for telling us about that. That's a good thing to have in my toolbox, my faith toolbox.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think that's a great idea as well. Like maybe we need to do like a faith toolbox of like little tips and things where we bank these. That might be interesting. So I've done a little bit of research around what other theologians have said about St. Augustine, and I wanted to take a step back and just look at the author himself, and get his context, just build out his context as we go in with like midway through the book. So we're going to delve into it, really get into his conversion over the next few chapters. We talked a little bit about Ratzinger, Pope John Paul II next, actually. I've got him as, he said, he emphasized in Confessions, it shows that the search for truth is not purely intellectual. Let me just read this again. St. John Paul II said this of Confessions. He said, St. Augustine's Confessions shows that the search for truth is not purely intellectual, it's a moral and spiritual quest too. St. Augustine teaches that the heart, not only the intellect, must be converted to truth. And I think that's so important. Like, it's so important around, especially when we hear these conversations about cultural Christians and things like that, where people who can realize the value of Christianity but not really fully accept it in their heart. They can accept the outcomes and the intellectual rationale, but to still have a hard heart in that sense, which is really tough. And I guess those people, we've got to pray for them, because they're like halfway there or almost there. You've got to also remember to be patient with everyone, and remember how patient God is with you as well. Bishop Barron also touts Confessions as the greatest spiritual autobiography in Western history, and I would tend to agree. He kicked off the genre of autobiographies. Bishop Barron goes on to say that the narrative that St. Augustine writes is essentially about the true drama of life, and in reality, it's also the drama of grace. St. Augustine talks about his temptations, his battles, his suffering, and his losses as well. That's what we've covered in the first few chapters. This is all a dramatic story, I guess. There's a fall. There's pride and a fall, and that's a great part of our Christian narrative, is that there's always a resurrection if you're humble enough to ask for it and to want it. So,
and we
yeah,
are.
Go ahead.
We are really getting to that climax of his story, because he meets St. Ambrose and he's charmed by his kindness. And then I love this. There's the last section of the chapter. He says, I therefore decided for the time being to be a catechumen in the Catholic Church, which was a really wonderful line to read. So like we made it to that first stepping stone.
Wow. It's amazing. And I think it's such an interesting journey, especially for like people who have come into the Catholic Church. I know, Olivia, you've come in, and Trevor and myself, we've been born into it. Fred, I think you maybe have been born as
So
well
did
into
I.
it. Yeah. So it's really, it's wonderful to see that people are like actively choosing it. Not only just like us reaffirming it, but it's a cruisy pathway if you're a cradle Catholic, because you're just absorbed in the culture in that sense, and you have that background. So it's like a default. But yeah, it's a great story, and it's almost like a prototypical journey. I don't know if does any of St. Augustine's journey so far resonate with you, Olivia, in terms of dabbling in other things and trying to work out your way in this world and what is the truth and sorting it out in
Yeah.
your own mind.
Yeah, I think like, I used to place a lot of importance on, like, intellectual pursuits a lot more than I do now, and I think that he also does that, where he's just, like, really focused on, like, finding the answers, what are the right answers, instead of trusting God, and that's a really hard process to learn. And I think that also it's really cool we see in this chapter when he meets St. Ambrose, I'm not talking to this guy or listening to this guy because I wanna become Catholic and because I wanna hear what he has to say in a Catholic way. I'm talking to this guy and I'm listening to this guy because this is one of the nicest people I've ever met. And that's my experience too. And it gives us an interesting perspective on evangelization because really, truly, like, one of the first things that led me to the church was going into a Catholic environment and having people be so kind. I didn't care. I didn't appreciate their thoughts. Like, I didn't care about their religious opinions, but the fact that they were legitimately kind to me, like, made such an impact. So I feel like that's like a lesson to us, and that kind of made me appreciate my people who had that impact on me because I really resonated with that. Wow, I didn't realize how much that really nice deacon at my church pulled me in.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're called to be, are you the Ambrose or are you the Augustine? And it's a great way to think about things in this context. It's if you're journeying with people as well, it's like in the relationship, are you going to be the Ambrose or are you the Augustine in this sense? I actually think that just really crystallized in my head there, how I look at relationships these days. It's like sometimes well, more often than not, especially in work, I work in the kind of corporate world and in business where people are a means to an end. I need to work with you because you're helping me with this. And I hate that. I hate that I'm like that. But it becomes like a default thing to think about. But it's great to think of people in the sense of a mentor and a mentee. And at a certain point in our life that will be, I think, Winfred, you're well and truly in the Ambrose part of your life where people are coming to you with questions. So maybe we'll start calling you Winfred Ambrose from now on.
Yeah. I think that how can I say it? I think you start bleeding it out. When you start living the life that Christ wants you to live, you just start showing it. And you're not supposed to be afraid to show what you believe in, right? And when you do that, I think people start respecting you. And I guess it comes with the job that people will depend on getting some advice because they probably think that, okay, so he's probably been through a lot of things and he found a way to overcome these things because he's a happy guy now, because I'm always happy. And I'm happy because I love Christ and I found Christ and I'm always hanging around to him. And I think that's what they see. I don't think I'm a perfect person. I used to be a very mean guy. I did a lot of bad things in my past, and everybody knows it. In my job, everybody knows it. But they know that I've made a lot of changes in my life also. And I think that when people see that you made changes in your life and you're not afraid to admit that you had to make those changes, people win their respect. And I think that's all it's about because that's what Christ wants you to do. Christ wants you to change your life. A real relationship with Christ, it changes lives. That's all it does.
Yeah, I guess
That's
so.
what
So
happened to
your
St.
arc
Augustine when he
really,
talked to Ambrose,
Right.
right?
What
Yeah.
happened there? He made it so it could be.
and there's so many of these examples where the people who are like really against Catholicism and Christianity, later on they become like the biggest spokesperson, and they repent and they turn around, and so and they become like the biggest weapon again for Christianity. So it's interesting how, I never really thought about it, but actually, even Winfred, like you talked about your past, like you definitely St. Augustine type past, and then becoming your own Bishop of Puerto Rico, hey?
Rome to be like the seat of the papacy, that's the biggest conversion, isn't it? Rome was the seat of the Antichrist and made that the HQI in flex.
That's the checkmate
Amen,
of
brother.
checkmate.
Yeah. Yeah, the biggest empire ever. I want to circle back because ChatGPT has given me a couple of more quotes from Fulton Sheen. Fulton Sheen talks a little bit about St. Augustine as well. And he again reiterates this idea of he's the first modern man torn between pleasure, ambition, and the search for truth. And that's so interesting because that is exactly the definition of, I think, modern man right now. And it was like 1500 years, 1700 years ago. So the nature of men really hasn't changed. Perhaps the environment and the ways of doing things, but the nature of man hasn't really changed, in my opinion. He goes on also to say, talking about St. Augustine, so Fulton Sheen's commentary on St. Augustine and modern lust, he talks a little bit about the modern world's obsession with sexual pleasure, and he says, in typical Fulton Sheen style, before there was Freud, there was Augustine. And unlike Freud, he knew that the answer was not indulgence, but surrender to divine love. How's that, Fulton Sheen, for you?
There you go.
Yeah.
I've been listening to too much. I've been listening to him like...
To wave your arms about a bit more.
Yes. I need to command the stage a bit more. And he
And
goes on to say...
JMJ.
That's right. Maybe I do need to get a chalkboard and just start doing Fulton Sheen impressions. So St. Augustine, he took...
interviewing.
Yeah. Olivia, you probably didn't catch it, but I did a spoof of Theo Von talking about, was it Mary's Assumption? Like the theological understanding of, he's just talking about it. But I think I might do a series on like Marian dogma as Theo Von. So I'll share the video. I don't know if I was going to do one for the Sacred Heart of Jesus as well, but it takes a lot of time to script and edit and practice his twang, etc.
Oh,
especially because I've got such a exactly. But he's just such a iconic kind of guy, and I've been following him for a while. So yeah, I love how his references are so odd for the way he grew up.
Is he a Christian? I'm not super familiar.
I believe he is a Christian. Yeah, I believe he's a Christian. He does talk a little bit about God and faith, but he's, I think, in through AA or through the rehab that he did, find Jesus.
That's amazing.
But I don't know much more about that. But yeah. Cool. I think the last thing Fulton says about Augustine's battle, he says that Augustine's battle showed that self-control comes not from repression, but from divine healing. And that's a really interesting, I guess it's a great psychological concept as well, because a lot of even the trans stuff, a lot of this comes, a lot of the way that we cope with things and the sins that we commit come from coping with a deeper hurt and even avoidance of that hurt as like a self-protection mechanism. I don't know if you guys have any comments on that about divine healing being the source of self-control, not like our own repression or our own will.
Yeah, I think that the difficult thing with that is that like our culture is just like the waiting is really hard, really hard. Like my first instinct, your body's like fight or flight. When something stressful happens or when I'm in an uncomfortable situation, even like we talked about the noonday devil, like every day at noon, I'm like, okay, I need to quit my job because I can't do this. I don't like this. I need action now. I'm not going to pray about it. This needs to be over right now. It feels so immediate. Or I'm sure for people who struggle with different issues, like you're just so uncomfortable because potentially a spiritual attack as well to that discomfort even more. And you just need to act right now. But really, the reality is God wants you to wait. God wants you to talk to him and confide in him. And that is actually really hard to do. Because it really, you don't need to do anything. You just need to do nothing and just be with the Lord.
That's right. Yeah,
It's
it's so
his time.
interesting. It's so true. Yeah, like you said, like a lot of it's not coming from a spirit of grace. It's coming from other areas, and we just need to be patient and actually rebuke. So, and don't forget that we're not like just subject to these like devil. We still have a will that can take away from us. So as long as we get
Your audio is not great. Can you say that again?
Yeah, your audio just got very soft all of a sudden.
Oh, I noticed. Is that better?
Now we're
Okay.
back.
All right. Okay. So what I was saying was like the noonday devils. It's not always these thoughts that we get when we're bored or frustrated or whatever. We have a will that can rebuke that as well. So don't forget that you're not just subject to these intrusive thoughts or your own human emotions. You can enact your will, and that can't be taken away from you. So yeah, don't be afraid to unite your will with Christ.
That's true. And I think like our head goes to the most extreme place of I need to quit instead of me being like, oh, I noticed that I'm more subject to this sin when I structure my day this way. Or I need to do this differently. I need to walk into my office and become prayerful immediately and start my day off on the right foot. Like there are things that are in our control or with other issues as well. But we just see the most extreme solutions. I feel like people are just generally, it's just hard to change. And it's easier to make a big change than it is to make 15 small changes that you don't feel immediately.
Exactly. And like you want the immediate payoff, but you don't want to do the harder work. It's actually that I find most of the time is that, oh, I can put this off or I can do something else and then just ignore that. But you got to pay the bill at some point. You got to pay the bill at some point. And if you don't, yeah, it just catches up to you. So and that comes back to the theme of the mundane life that 80% of our life is mundane activities. And you've got to do those. You've got to maintain those things, those duties. So if you can't, then, or if you get distracted and you allow yourself to stray from that straight and narrow path, life becomes much worse. But it's actually, boring in some sense is good. You just need to adjust your perspective to see what you're doing in a different way. But boring is good. And I think that's something that we perhaps don't value anymore.
I agree, which adds difficulty when you go to like non-Catholic friends, at least from what I've experienced, where I'm like, oh, like I'm bored or I'm uncomfortable. And those people suggest the big changes to me too. Like they don't understand where I'm coming from, where I don't want you to tell me that I do need to quit my job. I want you to, like someone said to me, I was talking to one of my friends the other day and she said, emotions are reality. And I'm like, okay, like I think that emotions are feedback, but that's a really like dangerous thing to say.
That's so dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of, do you control your emotions or do your emotions control you?
Yes. And I've been there because I'm a very emotional person. So it's easy to let them, if that's your biggest feedback that you're getting in your life, cool. It's really easy to let that guide your life. But that can lead you to like where St. Augustine's been at points in this book too, where he steals the fruit from the tree and he gives him these other situations that he shouldn't be in.
Back to Trevor's favorite part about pears. But yeah, I think it's crazy. There's so much of this restlessness, and I think, at least within my own experience, it's restlessness that I still just need to, even sometimes I'm like, man, I haven't prayed my rosary today. I don't really want to pray my rosary sometimes. And it's 20 minutes or whatever. And it's not like I have other more important things to do at that time anyway, but I still want to do it. And that's hard sometimes. But then once you settle in, it'll take me like a decade to really settle, and a decade, sometimes 2 decades for my brain to actually settle. So that's what's difficult. Like sometimes I try to break up my rosary throughout the day, but I don't actually get to settle for an extended period of time. So I'm trying different strategies here to get through my rosary. but I think I've just got to do the boring stuff.
I wouldn't
And I
break
think
my
that
Sorry, say that again?
I wouldn't be able to break my rosary up. I would just go right through the whole thing.
Yeah,
Finish
I
it.
know. And then once I start, yeah, it's hard to stop once you do start. Oh, I've got 15 minutes here for my next meeting. Maybe I can get in a few decades. But yeah. All right, guys. I appreciate it's probably getting a little bit late for you guys over there. And I think we've covered the main topics of this. So I'm glad we covered the essence of Manichaeism, the differences with Christianity. We also covered some more recent theologians' commentary on St. Augustine, a little bit of the geopolitical context around Carthage and Rome at the time, about 400 AD, and some of our journey as well in relation to St. Augustine and St. Ambrose. Which stage are we in our lives, and which character are we being to other people as well? Are we being an Augustine or are we being an Ambrose? So I've really explored a lot of ideas here, which has helped me conceptualize some stuff. So thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Interesting.
same. Thank you.
No worries. As usual, we finish